So I'm going to speak about the topic at hand, which is the further digitization of marketing. But I'm going to use the background of my book and the world that we're currently living in, which is the incredible world of COVID-19, to provide some perspectives, some provocations, and some points of view in the next 15 minutes. So I'm going to start with December 2019. Because here we are in May 2020, and we believe that the world has changed pretty dramatically. But if we recall December 2019, the world was already changing. And there were three major forces which was impacting all of marketing. In fact, it was impacting all of society. But these were the three big changes. The first was globalization was changing in its very nature. It wasn't going away, despite a lot of people thinking that it was going away. It was just becoming less North American and European centric. And it was becoming more multipolar with the rise of China, Africa, India, etc. And globalization is pretty much unstoppable. So if people tell you that it's going to be stopped, you could tell them to reconsider for the following reasons. One is in the last 20 years, 2 billion people have come out of poverty because of globalization. Second is 6.6 billion of the world's people are outside North America and Europe, and they actually prefer globalization versus not having globalization, though there is some, rise of nationalism. But as importantly, all the big opportunities and challenges in the future are actually of a global nature. And what we're basically seeing in the rise of nationalism is the fact that the world has gone global, but the countries are still national. Like, for instance, COVID-19. It can't be stopped by just stopping planes and by building a barrier. Think about climate change, or the fact that all of us, wherever we are, most of us are in Canada, but often we've been on things like this, where everybody is zooming in from all over the world or Skyping in from all over the world. So the internet is global, climate change is global, COVID-19 is global, immigration is global. And so we're living in a very much of a global world. That is sort of one perspective to keep in mind. The second is dramatic demographic shifts. You see that in Canada, you see that in the United States, you see that all over the world. In the United States, for instance, where I am based, every day, 10,000 people turn 65 years old. So while a lot of our marketing and advertising is fixated on the young, please keep in mind that at least in the US, and I'm pretty sure it's the same in Canada, 50 to 60% of all the wealth are 50 years and older. So interestingly, the people who have the economic money are actually the much older people versus sort of the much younger people. And at the very same instance, if you look at the US, next year under 21 years old will basically demographically turn Caucasian minority. So under 21 in the US will be Caucasian minority, not necessarily in just particular states like in California or Florida. And so you have these massive changes going on, which were happening already in December 2019, which is massive globalization changing, demographic shifts of a particular type. And then you had a third one, which is technology. And we had entered the third connected age. And to give you a frame of reference, many of you all know this since you're in technology. The internet's been around for a long time. Technology has been around since fire. But I truly believe that we entered the first connected age with the World Wide Web, which was around 1996, 1997. And at which stage, we began to connect in two ways. We connected to discover through things like search, which was Google, and we connected to transact, which is e-commerce, like Amazon. And those two are five of the most powerful companies in the Western world and the two of the five most market capitalized companies in the Western world. And from 1996, 1997 to 2007, for about a decade, we were in this first connected age. Connect to transact, connect to discover. So Google/search, Amazon/e-commerce. And it wasn't just Amazon and e-commerce. It just wasn't Google and search, but those are some indicators. Around 2007, 2008, we entered the second connected age, which built on the first connected age. And the second connected age came about because of smartphones, where we were now connected all the time, and because of social networks, where we were connected to everybody. So while the first was connect to transact and connect to inform, the second one was connect all the time and connect everybody. Facebook and Apple were the two big ones, and those are four of the five most valuable companies in the world. Now, each of them built on each other. So as we entered 2019, we had already started entering the third connected age. So the first two still matter. So e-commerce matters, search matters, social matters, mobile matters. But we were about to have an explosive new era. And that was the third connected age with four new forms of connection. One, we were basically going to be connecting to data, especially in the cloud, but data connecting to data and data in the cloud, which makes AI possible, machine learning in a great form. The second was much faster ways of connecting, which is 5G. Third is new ways to connect, of which voice was the first big interface. And fourth is things connecting to things, which is really the Internet of Things. So for those of you who have a Google Home or a Amazon Echo, those are early indicators of what the third connected age are. They're an Internet of Things. They're using machine learning to understand. They're using voice as an interface. They'll become smaller and more distributed in a 5G world. So we had already, in December 2019, whether you were a marketer, whether you were an agency, whether you were a media company, there was significant change going on, which was digitizing marketing and roiling marketing as we were entering this third connected age. Plus, we had demographic shifts. Plus, we had globalization. So let's not think about December 2019 like we were in the 1950s. It was already a very dramatic time. And then, of course, we had COVID-19 or COVID, and what COVID-19 is, from a sense of perspective, and I worked in business for 40 years, so I wasn't around, and I don't think many of you all were around in either 1929 for the Great Depression or 1918 for the Great Plague. And if you were around, then congratulations on being a very healthy 91. But with that being said, I don't believe that when people basically say this is the Great Recession 2, or it's the Great Acceleration, or it's something like this, it's nothing like anything, because in the last 40 years, we've never had something which is both a health crisis, like SARS and MERS and Ebola, a political crisis like 9/11, an economic crisis like the dot-com boom, dot-com bust, and the 2008, 2009. So this is all of those together. That's number one. Two, it's happening to everybody in the world. None of those crises actually were global in any nature, including 2008, 2009. And third is we've put everybody into this framework for between 60 to 90 to 120 days. Therefore, to a great extent, what I call this is the Great Reinvention. What we're going to basically see coming out of this is the reinvention of society, the reinvention of business, and the reinvention of people and people's behavior in ways that are dramatic and long-lasting, some that we cannot actually predict. But so from one sense of perspective, as we move into the future, we are basically moving into a future where the third connected age of major technology is meeting this other big force. And what I will remind you again what this means later on in my conversation, about 5 minutes. But just remember that. That's the first sort of thought to keep in mind. So in this particular world, here is what I do believe. I believe that in this world, which is highly, highly data-driven, and so my book is basically called Restoring the Soul of Business, Staying Human in the Age of Data. And it's not really one book. It's actually 12 books in one with 12 chapters. You can read it in any order. But my underlying premise is that businesses that are too data-driven or businesses that don't pay any attention to data, both of those businesses are going to be failing businesses. So, for instance, if you are a data-driven only business, you basically get so besotted by numbers that you start making silly decisions, like a Wells Fargo bank did by opening up fake accounts, or Boeing by shipping planes that were not ready. If you're too much about no data, but all about like mystical marijuana-driven dreams, you have something like WeWork. True companies like a Adobe, like a Microsoft, like a Southwest Airlines, like a Costco, balance the story and the spreadsheet. They balance the math and the meaning. So we're in this particular world, which is, while it is going digital and very data-driven, I will also make the following case. Data is so important that it's like electricity. Literally, it's like electricity. You can't run a business without it. However, and for the last few years, we've been in that era where we've gone from the steam engine to electricity. So we're fixated on data. But let me ask you, outside of a few companies, which company today can differentiate itself on use of data? Because I would ask you, tell me which company differentiates itself by using electricity, or how it uses electricity. So many businesses have become so data driven that they've lost every competitive advantage, which usually has to do with the story of the business, the values of the business, the talent of the business, the culture of the business. They've thrown it all out and they've become all data, data, data. Think of the last 10 decisions you basically made. I would basically say, or the 10 last purchases, that 7 of the 10 were not actually data-driven decisions. People choose with their hearts and they use numbers to justify what they just did. And if you believe that it's all going to be a data-driven decision, then I strongly believe that you should get a new job. Anybody whose job is highly driven by data will be replaced faster than they know it by a machine. I have an advanced degree in mathematics and MBA in finance. Machines can do that shit faster. So if you have a client, or you're a client who says, I make all my decisions through data, you have a client who's going to lose their job. So it's data plus story. It's storytelling plus spreadsheet, and you combine those two. And I do believe that like never before, because of COVID-19 and because of the third connected age, we are entering an era where humanity will matter more than ever before. And let me prove it to you with COVID-19 as an example. So number one, yes, we're living in a data-driven silicon age, which is digital. So digital, data-driven, and silicon. But why has everything stopped? Everything has stopped because a little germ can eat at us carbon-based, analog, feeling individuals. And what are we missing? We're missing connections with people. So to a great extent, if there was ever a fact to understand that even in this data-driven digital age, there is a reason for carbon analog-based people, we now basically sort of have it. So with the exception of everybody being killed and just basically machines talking to machines, with some idiots like who I will not name in Silicon Valley believe will happen, called the singularity, because they're singularly stupid people. Outside of that, the reality of it is it's people plus machines, and it's not just machines. And so we're living in an age where people really, really are going to not think about digital. They're not going to think about analog. I believe the right word to think about is, if you want a sophisticated word, it's hybrid. If you want a non-sophisticated word, it's mongrel. So we're going to basically have a mongrel mix of business. We're going to have a mongrel mix of everything. So for instance, if you're thinking about offline and online, don't just think about offline and online for commerce. Think about offline and online for every conference you will have in the future. All future conferences will have an offline version and an online version. I'm just watching TED. So TED is back, not in Vancouver this year, it's virtual. And it kind of works okay, but because it costs 1/15th as much, it works great. I get more than enough out of it. Think about restaurants. Every restaurant, with the exception of the really top ones, are going to basically have either drive-through, pickup, or delivery, at least for the next year or two. And so if you aren't thinking omnichannel in every way, if you aren't thinking mongrel mix of everything that you do, it may not make sense. So that's one big provocation. The second one is, I really believe that no business should think about restarting. You should think about starting. So this is where I go back to 2008, 2009. In 2008, 2009, we had the Great Recession, and we had the second connected age, where we were connected to everybody because of smartphones, and we were connected all the time because of social networks. Coming out of that Great Recession, companies like General Motors and Ford, who had taken on a bunch of debt, managed to pay off their debt, and they went on competing with each other. But what actually happened because of the second connected ages and new technologies and new behaviors, you had new companies rising like Uber and Tesla, which now basically have decimated the automobile profits. So Tesla is worth more than the next three companies in the United States in market cap in a very strange way. Or think about Gillette and Schick. They kept talking to each other about the fourth blade and the fifth blade, or telling us about that. But because of things like YouTube and because of social media, it gave birth to companies like Dollar Shave Club and companies like Harry's, which took away 15 share points from Gillette, and it resulted in a $10 to $12 billion write-down of P&G's acquisition of Gillette. So when you think about this post-COVID-19 world, do not use the word restarting, think about starting. What if you basically had a fresh sheet of paper with only 3 rules? Rule number 1 is you have to make money in the next 3 years. Rule number 2, whatever you do has to be legal. Rule number 3, it has to use today's technology. Build companies or services that actually meet new needs of your customers, or you basically could compete with yourself. Because make no mistake, any plan you wrote before December 2019, you should light it on fire, because your customer or your consumer of your customer has changed. So think about yourself. Whenever a habit is formed or disformed, you have to do the same thing or stop doing something for 30, 60, or 90 days. And we all worldwide have done that for 30, 60, and 90 days. So think about how restaurants will change, how workspaces will change, how travel will change, and therefore your business, your service, everything will change. And so think about starting versus restarting. And please don't use the word new normal. New normal is an oxymoron. It makes no sense. Think about new and normal. It shouldn't go together. I would basically use the word semi-normal, because for a long time, businesses are going to come back about 30 to 50%. So semi-normal is what Bill Gates says. I prefer an even better one, which is the new strange. We're going to be looking at the new strange, where everything is going to be changed in society to a great extent, but human connections won't, but a lot of the way we deliver will be changed. I'm going to end in the last 2 minutes and open it up for questions. Is a couple of things that all of us should do. And when I speak with both either clients or folks, I advise folks to do a couple of things besides obviously starting and restarting and all of that. So number 1 is, do recognize that this is the best time in the world to upgrade your mental operating system. That in many ways, as we enter the third connected age, as we enter the new strange, what we have to recognize is maybe the way we think isn't correct. So try to build the case for the exact opposite of what you think is true. Try to build the case for the exact opposite of your current business model, because in that way you might actually grow resilient, and as a result you move forward. And the second one is, like never before, as you probably have seen over the last 60 to 90 days, if you are a boss, people have been looking at you to see if you're a good leader or not. Even if you're not a boss, people look for you for leadership. A lot of people are thinking about, why do they work, where do they work, who do they work for, and where is the future going? And so to a great extent, leadership will matter more than ever before. And having studied leadership for my book, where I have a chapter called Leading with Soul, I'll end with 5 characteristics of leadership. And just take these 5 words down and think about these from how you could be really good at it. You probably are, regardless of your level. And also then think about in your case, your prime minister, the head of, your sort of state, and probably somebody else. Just put this against your leaders and see what a good leader is or not. So the first one is capability. What people look in leadership are capability and competence, which is, you can't be a leader if you don't know what you're doing. That's number 1. Number 2 is integrity, which is, integrity is a combination of a lot of things. Transparency is one, trust happens to be one, fact-driven, believing in science. These things are important. The third is empathy. Do you care about other people, or do you only care about yourself? So one of my thoughts has been that none of us are really working from home. We're all working under duress from home, because we're anxious about our health. We are often fearful about our jobs. We're uncertain about our future. So is it for your employees and your colleagues. The third is vulnerability. To understand that many of us are making decisions with a gun to a head. We have to make sure that our companies don't go out of business. We're laying off people who we would never lay off. We have to sort of recognize that we ourselves are very vulnerable as what we make decisions on. And finally, inspiration, because in many ways, despite this massive tragedy, which is a massive tragedy, coming out of it, it's like an asteroid has hit the Earth. Many dinosaurs will die. There will be new mountains to climb, and there'll be new lakes to look at. But the future will be bright once we get over this. And with that, I turn it back to Alex.
That's amazing. Thank you for sharing that.
Welcome.
So many things. I don't even know where to start, but I'm going to ask you. I'll start with a couple questions. So, Deloitte and Accenture talk about pre-COVID, talked about digital transformation as a massive failure, right? The statistics were over 80% failed. Why did they fail? And based on your view, what can they do? What can brands and companies do that are listening to us tonight to ensure the next iteration of that transformation? And I hate using that word, it's such a cliche. But what advice can you give them to be more successful? I think you've laid some of it out, but I want you to crystallize that again for them.
So the reason that many attempts at transformation failed was primarily because change sucks and nobody told people that change sucked. Okay. So I studied change in a great way. It's one of the chapters in my book called Change Sucks, right? And I've worked for the same company before I started becoming a writer and speaker, etc. for 38 years. I've lived in the same city for 40, and I met my wife 48 years ago. So when somebody comes to me and says, change is good, I say, I'm happy you change. Right? It's the ridiculous. People come and tell you change is good. So I say, if it's so good, why don't you change? I don't want to change. I'm perfectly fine. The problem is, while change sucks, irrelevance is even worse. But if you want to make change happen, a lot of people basically talked about strategy, press releases, and acquisitions. That is not the way you make change happen. There are three key formats to change. Number one is you have to recognize that human beings have to see the need for change. One of the big things that have happened because of COVID-19. As someone said, COVID-19 has been more impactful than any chief digital officer, chief transformation officer, or chief executive officer. What it really has done is senior management or anybody who wasn't believing has been zoomed into the future. That's what's happened. Over the last 60 days, there's not a single senior person, and I deal with 8 to 10 senior people a week at CEO levels. Nobody doesn't believe that their business model has to change. The future is increasingly digital or mongrel-like. Everybody believes that. So that's number one. Number two is incentive systems. If you don't pay people to change, if you don't incentivize them to change, why should I change? Companies basically say, let's change, but they let all the old people, all the senior people behave in exactly the same way. They still pay the old stuff. So the magazine companies kept paying the magazine people, right? Condé Nast kept keeping Anna Wintour and all these people all going when everything was clear what would happen. Condé Nast should have been the next Instagram. They were not. Condé Nast, it was clearly, whether it was Condé Nast or Hearst, all of these people, it was clear for years what needed to be done. But why would I do it if I don't get paid to do it? That's the second. And the third is training, right? We are not immaculately born. I hear all these things like, take the truck drivers and make them coders. Problem. Truck drivers can't be coders, and many coders can't be truck drivers. You need training. So if you don't have communication and understanding the change sucks, if you don't have incentive systems and you don't have training. Now, the good news is all the resistance to change has been removed. And now we're going to basically have this particular sort of new world. And there is an advantage and a disadvantage to this new world. And one of the big advantages is that no one can tell me that they're limited in getting talent for two reasons. One is, unfortunately, because of this, 25 to 30% of the workforces in major countries are unemployed. So you can basically get talent relatively cheaply now, without a doubt. That's number one. Number two is because most companies are going to primarily work from home, or majority are going to work from home. It doesn't matter where your talent is. It no longer has to be in Silicon Valley or Toronto or New York. It can be wherever. So I truly believe that you're going to see this massive, and again, because of the third connected age, you're really going to see transformation. But we have never been able to transform because we've forgotten that companies don't transform, technology doesn't transform, M&A doesn't transform, humans transform. And we've never focused on people. So I've always said the only way a company transforms is by transforming its people.
And that's really, I think, the premise of the book you wrote, this idea that digital transformation can only be realized if you balance you called it stories and spreadsheets, people. Tell me, I have so many questions, but tell me, one of the things I love is this emphatic statement that says, start. So, and you gave us the formula: make money, do what's legal,
Right.
Focus on tech. So tell me, in that view, based on your global perspective, what are some of the companies you're betting on? Who's doing it right?
So right now, the companies that in the technology space, the companies that are doing it intensely correctly are companies like Microsoft and Adobe. The companies that are doing it very right in the consumer space is a company like RB, which is the old record Kieser. They make Lysol and they make Dettol and Mucinex, etc. So I'll give you an idea. That company, what they basically did is they realized that they have a great opportunities. So what they've done is they've partnered with Hilton. So Hilton and Lysol are going to they've created a service within 3 weeks to make sure that the Hilton rooms are clean. Mm-hmm. Similarly, Clorox and Cleveland Clinic has tied in with United Airlines. So one of the key things is you have to reimagine your business. You are not basically Lysol the spray. You can basically now stand for protection, right? So you can stand for purity. You can stand for cleanliness. Because one of the key things that I would basically say, and this is a key thought, is what everyone is looking for around the world is they're looking for safety. So I want to feel safe working safety. They're looking for security, both financial security, job security. They're looking for value and values. So value is basically, most people feel poorer today, so they want to make sure that they can go further. But values, and one of the biggest values is companies that actually focus on their employees. So these companies like Adobe, RB, etc., are focusing on purpose and employees. If you don't focus on your employees, don't talk to me about environmental, your sustainability governance plan. If you can't look after your people, you can't look after anybody.
Right. So true. So look, we don't have a ton of time left. I want to ask you two more questions. The first one is, what's the one, I remember listening to you, you were speaking at the Berlin School of Creativity, and you had this really strong point of view about television, and you made a point, something like, no brand has launched using TV in the last 10 years. Tell us now, in kind of this post-COVID world, we're seeing such massive change, to your point, uncomfortable change, but we're seeing change in usage, media usage, and advertising. What's your view on the path forward there?
So 2 years ago, I basically said that advertising is in secular decline, even though I was working for an advertising agency, right? That I anticipated that television advertising and advertising where you insert messages inside content in a distracting way was going to decline by 25 to 30% in the next 5 years. That was 2 years ago. I believe that's going to happen in 3 years and not 5 years. And part of the reason simply is, if you think about it, is in a world of Netflix and a whole bunch of other things, we are watching less television. In a world of Spotify, we're watching video, but we're not watching ad-supported television. Less and less of it. And then the other one is most of the, like for instance, if you saw a lot of the advertising over the last 2 months or last 6 weeks, there are these famous YouTube commercials, etc. I've never seen so much rotten shit at one time for the last 8 weeks, right? People were basically, every commercial was the same. And I'll give you an idea. Let's say I'm sitting at home. Why are you advertising, as if you're an automobile company, why are you advertising the following two things? First of all, I don't want to learn about your solidarity and legacy and sweet music, forget that. But why are you advertising the following? You're advertising 0% interest rates. Okay, I've just lost my job. Am I thinking of buying a car? I've got a 10% pay cut. I've been on furlough. Am I thinking of buying a car? Why do I want a 0%? Like, it's the whole idea is like, I'm going to kill you. I'm going to kill you slower. Why are you telling me that? That's number one, right? And then I'm going to drive you and this and that. Forget that. Here's my big issue. This is what they should have been advertising. We know you're probably out of a job. So guess what? You're probably not worried about how to buy a new car. You're worried about your car payments. we're going to waive your next 3-month car payments and we're going to add it to the end of your lease. So we're not going to give you the money, but you don't have to worry about the next 3 months. We'll add it at the end of the lease. That is much more interesting. So companies like in the US, like Allstate, began to basically advertise, say, look, you're in good hands. Less people are driving. And as a result, we're going to send you a rebate check because there are not as many collisions. So the whole idea is, don't think about advertising. Think about, are you solving a problem, which is S? Are you making things more accessible, which is A? Are you delivering on value or values, which is B? Or are you making a better experience to deal with you, which is safe? Anything else doesn't make sense. And so you can do marketing. I think this is a renaissance of marketing and the decline of advertising.
And on that note, the renaissance of marketing and the decline of advertising, I would love to ask you about why you wrote this book, but we will do that offline and I will post that comment. Thank you very much. You were awesome. I really appreciate you taking the time out of your schedule to speak to us in Toronto. Welcome. You always have a home here. Thank you very much.
Perfect. Thank you very much. And you can just type in Rishad on Amazon and hopefully you can buy my book for more of this nonsense.
Yeah.
Thank you.
We'll plug your book. Yeah, absolutely.
Thank you.